Good afternoon. Welcome to this month's webinar. My name is Mike Kramer. I'm doing this webinar on behalf of Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation, where I am the Calibration Inspection Program Manager. And as you can see, the topic for this month is a look at Section 8.5, which is a section entitled Actions to Address Risk and Opportunities. As always, this webinar is being recorded, and if you haven't been to our website recently, it's been newly designed, and we actually have a link right on the top there that says webinars, and you can go right to that tab. Very easy to find. And this webinar, as well as webinars we've provided over the last couple of years, are available for your informational needs and listening pleasure. So this is a topic, as I'm sure you all are aware, that 17025 is been revised. It's 17025 2017. Been talked about and discussed a lot in 2017 when it was going to be implemented, and all throughout the draft process, the whole concept of risk has been emphasized and strongly magnified in the 2017 standard. And you can see from this slide here that risk-based thinking, the risk appears over 30 times in the 2017 document as compared to 4 times in the 2005. So as a result of this shift to risk-based thinking, there is no longer any reference to preventive action. This is essentially replaced by the new clause on addressing risks and opportunities. And if you think about it, even in assessing preventive action, and always refer to that as a proactive approach, which looking at risk and risk-based thinking, that is exactly what that's encompassing. It's a preventive measure. It's a proactive approach. So looking at the standard, there's a note in the 2017 standard that states, and a note within a standard is for informational purposes, that there is no requirement for formal risk assessment methodologies. The fact that the new emphasis on the consideration of risk is in place, laboratories will need to produce evidence of compliance with the new clause. So those laboratories who already undertake regular management review or staff meeting with stresses improvement opportunities may likely find that they're already meeting most of the requirements in the 2017 standard in regards to Section 8.5 on actions to address risk and opportunities. Just thinking about the whole concept of risk, I'm certain even within your organization that it's something that you're probably doing anyway, but just probably may not have thought, how are we actually doing this? Something that we encounter in everyday life, if you think about it. Some common examples will be, of course, driving. Whenever we get into a vehicle, there's risk involved. Certain times we have to address those risks more in depth than others. Could be weather conditions. Could be examples I have here is by staying off the cell phone. You could be going down the road, maybe expecting an important phone call. The phone rings, you have a decision to make, and I'm sure you evaluate the risk, i.e. traffic, perhaps being caught by law enforcement, and then evaluate that against the need to answer the phone, depending on the importance of the phone call, of course. May decide to perhaps reduce that risk, perhaps drive off the road, put the car in park, then make that phone call. Other examples is in food preparation. We keep surfaces clean, avoid transfers of bacteria from uncooked food from our hands, because if we don't, we realize that there's a risk involved. Simple things like going up the stairwell, whether or not to use the handrail. You're basically taking risk into consideration. Non-routine tasks such as changing light bulbs in a ceiling fan, making the decision to get a good ladder or a step stool, not a chair, using harsh chemicals perhaps to clean with, the method of putting protection on your hands to combat the risk that could be associated with that. Going out doing yard work, putting substantial shoes are important in operating any power equipment. Good leather gloves for handling brush are a big plus. So just try and emphasize here, risk-based thinking is something that we're do on a daily basis. Just probably haven't really thought about how we do it. The picture depicted at the bottom there, the little cartoon there. Don't know if this fella has adopted a risk-based approach or not, but trying to grab a award-winning apple there. Don't know if they considered the risk of the unstable foundation that was associated with the opportunity to acquire that award-winning fruit. I'm going to look at some definitions with risk and risk-based thinking. There's a lot of resources out there, a whole lot of resources on risk-based thinking, risk management. With the internet, that's even just even putting this presentation together, just Googling some terms. It's a wealth of information out there, and some terms, of course, that appear quite often in considering risk and opportunity. Of course, is risk itself. What is it? A simple definition is what making achieving an objective uncertain. That's a simplified definition. Levels of risk, an expression of the importance of the risk, taking into account the consequences and the likelihood of situation. Risk evaluation, comparison of the risk level with an acceptance criteria. Risk treatment, many options are possible and can be combined, avoiding the risk, taking the risk to seize an opportunity, eliminating the source of the risk, changing the likelihood of occurrence or consequences, sharing risk or accept risk as it is and inform on it. Residual risk, risk remaining after risk treatment, sometimes associated with risk mitigation. Basically, you may have an unacceptable amount of risk where you're able to lessen the risk to a acceptable level. Opportunity, an event with potential positive outcome for the organization. 2017 standard in the forward section addresses risk. Basically, risk-based thinking does enable reductions in prescriptive requirements and their replacement by performance requirements. Hopefully, laboratories will be able to use this extra flexibility in practices. One thing with the 2017 standard, you don't see terms such as shall have policies and procedures. Laboratories have greater flexibility on how they can comply with the requirements in the 2017 standard. I have an example there. Same requirements. Labs shall have policies and procedures, and there's a shall there. So you have to have policies and procedures to ensure protection of confidential information, including electronic storage and transmission of results. Same requirement, 2017. Laboratory shall ensure the protection and confidential information, including electronic storage and transmission of results. Hence that shall have policy and procedure are removed. Hence the lab has flexibility on how they ensure the protection of confidential information. And something that's been with me on our last few webinars, quite often I resort back, if you have policies and procedures, you can still utilize them to comply with various sections within the 2017 standard. However, they are not required as they were in the 2005 standard. So addressing both risk and opportunities established a basis for increasing the effectiveness of the management system, achieving improved results, and preventing negative effects. The laboratory is responsible for deciding which risk and opportunities need to be addressed. So looking at the requirements, there's 3 clauses in Section 8.5. We'll look at them individually here. 8.5.1, the laboratory shall consider the risk and opportunities associated with the laboratory activities in order to give assurance that the management system achieves its intended results, enhance opportunities to achieve the purpose and objectives of the laboratory, prevent or reduce undesirable impacts and potential failures in the laboratory activities, and achieve improvements. Next clause, 8.5.2, the laboratory shall plan actions to address these risks and opportunities and how to integrate and implement these actions into the management system and evaluate the effectiveness of these actions. Hence, this note, there's a note there after 8.5.2. Although this document specifies that the laboratory plans actions to address risk, there is no requirement for formal methods for risk management or a documented risk management process. Laboratories can decide whether or not to develop a more extensive risk management methodology than is required by this document through the application of other documents, other guidance documents or standards. Again, a lot of flexibility there for the laboratories. So, question arises after reading that: how to assess risk in a laboratory? To identify risk, it is useful to consider both the internal context of the organization, its external contents, which would be risk related to customers, the suppliers, but also to the customers of the client and the stakeholders. Risk identification methods range from common sense and brainstorming, the use of pre-established lists for a professional sector, to the use of standards setting good practices. So the assessment of risk can be addressed by answering the following questions. What can happen and why? Identify the risk. What are the consequences? What is the probability of their future consequences? Are there any factors that mitigate the consequences of the risk or that reduce the probability of the risk? So 8.5, it's a new requirement as opposed to the 2005. Let's say laboratories are going to need to create some sort of record that this has taken place. Here's an example of a spreadsheet that can be used. Basically, and as I said in the previous slide, creating a record. Here's an example of a tool that can be utilized. We have a spreadsheet here where we have pre-mitigation and post-mitigation. So basically, in this particular spreadsheet, we identify the risk, severity of the risk likelihood, and the risk level. We then look at the risk and we treat it. What can we remove it? Is there anything we can do to lower the risk? And then we look at it post mitigation and review those categories that we assessed during the pre-mitigation, which includes risk severity, risk likelihood, risk level, and make the decision whether or not it's acceptable to proceed. One thing while I'm on this slide, this is a slide that I am planning on forwarding in the PJLA and putting it up on our web source. As many of you know, we have calculators and resources for organizations to use up there. This is something that I plan on putting up on our website in the near future for you all to utilize if you so elect. But this will, here, as I stated in the previous slide, create a record, create that objective evidence that this is being done. Hopefully it's being done and the lab is benefiting from it. Also comes with various rating scales. So we're going to identify the risk, the severity of the risk, rate the risk, look at the likelihood, if the likelihood of the risk actually occurring, and then can utilize this grading system to incorporate the post-mitigation and the decision-making of whether or not to proceed with the opportunity with the risk that's either was initiated from the onstart or the reduced risk after we addressed it, and making that decision whether or not to proceed. Finally, very last clause in Section 8.5, actions taken to address risk and opportunity shall be proportional to the potential impact on the validity of laboratory results. So just like corrective action, the magnitude that it would affect laboratory results, any risk that impacts the end results of your laboratory activities, i.e. the results of your testing or laboratories, shall take precedence. Notes under that include opinions to address risk can include identifying and avoiding threats, taking risk in order to pursue opportunities, eliminating the risk source, changing the likelihood or consequences, sharing the risk, or retaining risk by informed decisions. Additionally, opportunities can lead to expanding the scope of laboratory activities, addressing new customers, using new technologies, and other possibilities to address customers' needs. So as I stated previously, there's a lot of information on risk-based thinking. There's a lot of tools out there. And I always stated previously, and also the standard, it's up to the lab to make that determination of what risks and opportunities are going to pursue. And there is no specific requirement that a formal risk management tool has to be employed. However, I just wanted to show some that are available and go through some examples during this presentation. So some common risk management tools include failure mode and effect analysis, hazard and operable studies, risk management checklists, Pareto charts, fishbone diagrams, fault tree, SWOT analysis, risk-informed decision-making, brainstorming. Couple of references there for you folks if you want to take advantage of them. But like I said, there's many publications and documentations and tools available on this topic. So just going to take a couple of these, going to run through some examples here. You may have heard of SWOT. I work for an organization, Fortune 500 company. We were swatting everything. They adopted this approach long before 17025 was addressing risk and opportunities. So what is SWOT? SWOT is an acronym that stands for strengths, weakness, opportunities, and threats. A SWOT analysis is an organized list of your business' greatest strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Okay, I'm going to do a SWOT analysis. We're going to do an example here, and I realize this is not lab related, but I think the analysis and the example can be crosswalked over to any type of organization. So here we are, Delightful Dog Grooming, and we're going to do a SWOT analysis to create a marketing action plan. So first thing, and this could be done, ideally, the more minds into it, the better. Brainstorming, do your SWOT analysis, and invite a group of folks to look at this project, and then basically SWOT it. What are the strengths of this organization? Well, came up with things like they have many return customers. Customer satisfaction. Customers do say they like the services and give positive word of mouth by recommending grooming to others. They get walk-in business. They have a mobile grooming van that has eye-catching logos and gives some exposure when performing on-site services. What are the weaknesses? Came up with it. Don't pay much attention to marketing. They've been depending on word of mouth and website. And looking at that, the website is purely informational and has been remaining static. Don't have a marketing plan, and currently don't have much of a marketing budget. What type of opportunities are there out there? This particular example, what came up in swatting this marketing program was to take advantage of increasing the increasing popularity of dogs. Opportunities through the increasing use of social media. Take opportunities through increasing the amount of walk-in traffic. Take advantage of things like local annual pet fairs, kennel clubs, rescue societies, local SPCA. So in other words, events that folks with dogs that perhaps could utilize the groom services are likely to attend. Threats. So what threats are there out there? What came up here was other dog groomers, businesses in town. Competition is increasing. There's a dog groomer business that has a series of radio ads running, and it's also running newspapers ads once a week. There's a competitor in town that has partnered with the local SPCA to host a dog washing and grooming day every few months and donating part of these proceeds to the SPCA. And there is an expense of running media ads. And of course, the marketing budget is limited. So after we've done that, this organization, utilizing the SWOT approach, Ask a series of questions. Looking at the strengths and opportunities. Do strengths open up any opportunities? Customers say they like services and are willing to recommend them. That could create some type of referral reward program to actively encourage referrals. A loyalty program for repeat customers. They said they had a lot of repeat business could be developed. They could try to increase the walk-ins by having an eye-catching window display. Also considered relocating the business to a location that they would get more walk-in traffic. Look into setting up a booth at the local animal fair. See if kennel clubs, rescue societies, etc. are interested in partnerships. Increase the use of social media and investigate how low-cost ways of promoting the business. Looking at the next question, they look at their weaknesses and their strengths. How can they convert those weaknesses to strength? Looking at opportunities and listed weaknesses, looks like social media could be a real marketing opportunity. Instead of just having an informational website, our business could put up a Facebook page or open a Twitter account to try to reach out to old and new customers. Dogs are so popular, might be a helpful tweet. Rover says regular grooming makes them healthy. Pinterest, Instagram might also be good options. Pictures of cute pets are very popular. What do we have to do to use these opportunities? Set up social media business account pages. Already familiar with Facebook, Twitter through personal accounts. Set aside time or assignment of staff person to update Facebook, Twitter's account. Set up Pinterest and Instagram account. Purchase a camera and train a staff person to take photos of animals and post images. Canvas staff for Facebook contest ideals. Fill out details of annual pet fairs, such as when it runs and how much a booth table would cost. There, remember, we'll also have cost logistics of manning the booth or table too. Continued. Scout out some possible new business locations. Contact a realtor and ask about a more centralized business locations where many people walk their pets. Canvas kennels clubs, dog rescue groups for possibilities, partnerships, opportunities. Contact window artists for quotes on a window display. Decide on referral discounts and customer loyalty schemes and notify existing customers. The threats are still out there. How do we best neutralize these threats? Well, without a bigger marketing budget, we can't run competing radio and newspaper ad campaigns. Although it would be a good idea to run occasional newspapers ad, might be able to set off the competition's newspaper and radio campaigns through developing our online presence as above and running marketing campaigns on social media. So the results here, as you can see, this SWOT analysis has created the C's of an action plan, providing clear direction for how this small business can counter their competition marketing efforts and increase their own customer space. Creating a management checklist seems pretty straightforward. Checklist for analyzing risk. And any type of project management, let's say, for example, testing calibration lab. You want to maybe expand your scope of accreditation, get into doing a different area of calibration or a different area of testing, for example. So in any type of project management such as that, risk management is a necessary tool. Risk management identifies and prioritizes risk measures how harmful they can be, and develops a plan to deal with risks that are a threat to the project. Beyond creating a risk management plan, you should look also to create a risk management checklist. As you develop your risk management checklist, including the risk and how they will be dealt with, a risk checklist should quickly tell you from past experience and forecasting if a risk area will evolve. So creating a checklist. First thing we want to do is look at the scope of the work. The first part of your risk checklist should include questions and answers such as, has the work been done before, or is it something new? In essence, has an area in the work been identified in prior project as a risk? If a task is a new task within the project, what risk may occur? Project resources. That's the second part of the checklist, should deal with your resources. Do you have the right number of resources? Do your resources have the experience they need to do? They have to be trained. How experienced are they, and do they work well together? Again, if a resource risk is a potential problem, it should be identified on your checklist. Project timeline. The third part of your risk management checklist should identify items like scheduling conflicts, and if they are flexible. Will you and your team have enough time to complete all the tasks within the project? If any items are identified as a risk, list them there. Project cost. The fourth part should identify risk that has to do with project cost and project overrun costs. If you feel a project may overrun its budgets, list this as a risk on your checklist. Outside sources. What outside sources are involved in the project that may cause a risk? They're a fifth part of your checklist. If you feel an outside source can't deliver on time or has other issues that are considered to be a risk, put them on your risk checklist. For example, you're going to increase your scope. You may have a customer that's existing customer that has a need. The outside source, of course, would be that customer. Can pursue all this, but the risk, perhaps that outside source out of your control will perhaps go to another source to get these test for calibration, or may decide they no longer have a need. Deliverables. Can you deliver the project? That means not just the goals of the project, but the project itself. A goal may be to analyze tools to change the process, and the project may be to change a certain process. If you feel the project has risk in its deliverables, identify this as a risk. And for your amusement and pleasure, I put that little cartoon there. Okay, there's a couple examples of risk tools, how they was used in one organization, and hopefully how something you may look at and decide whether or not perhaps you want to utilize those tools in your organization. Develop a checklist, perhaps. Look at those questions. Identify the risks based on those questions. So the requirements, once again, in 2017 states in the introduction part of that standard, this document requires laboratories to plan and implement actions to address risk and opportunities. Addressing both risks and opportunities establish a basis for increasing the effectiveness of the management system, achieving improved results, and preventing negative effects. The laboratory is responsible for deciding which risk and opportunities needs to be addressed. The laboratory is responsible for deciding which risks and opportunities need to be addressed. The accrediting body, however, assesses whether the laboratory has established appropriate actions for dealing with risk and opportunities in accredited laboratories. So looking at this whole concept, and the vast array of 17025 is for testing and calibration lab. A lot of activities are being done there. We have organization, 2-3 person organizations. We have very large organizations that are could be several hundred people long, could be testing or calibration labs, say, within a larger organization, could be within a manufacturing plant. Hence, as far as assessing risk, this may vary among laboratories in certain instances. So we'll look at the requirement for impartiality. It's a good example of where the risk and measure necessary may vary among laboratories. Say a privately owned lab with many customers where the owner or lab personnel has no other activity or ownership is unlikely to need extensive measure to protect impartiality. However, there could be other situations. A lab may only have one customer. A lab where the owner owns some of the customers. A lab within a manufacturer also taking on third-party work. A lab with minimum wage staff and culture known for corruption. 17025 is an international standard. A lab where its ownership is complex and keeps changing and does that of the related bodies within the structure. So those other bulleted items there, of course, the requirement for assessing risk, particularly on an ongoing basis, may be more complex depending on the environment in which the lab is operating on. Excuse me, operating in. Technical example here. So 6410 of the standard states when intermediate checks are necessary to maintain confidence in the performance of equipments, these checks shall be carried out according to a procedure. So the complexity of this will vary according to risk. Let's take, for example, a gauge block or a mass standard used as a reference. May need little by way of intermediate checks. On the other hand, a sensitive electronic item exhibiting drift may need frequent checks, plotting and calculations from comparisons, resulting in a drifting reference value being identified. So hence that could be crosswalked right over to calibration intervals. What risk is a lab willing to take? A 1 to 2 year interval, the likelihood of, say, the electronic device without a good system of intermediate checks, not having that device calibrated, let's say over 2 years, having it calibrated 2 years as opposed to 1 year, the risk of perhaps that device coming back as being out of tolerance and non-conforming work coming into play would be much greater than perhaps a stable artifact, such as a set of gauge blocks or a stable mass standard that's used appropriately within laboratory operations. Talked about A5, we mentioned that risk is mentioned much more in the 17025 2017 as opposed to 2005. So just going to look at some other areas where risk is specified in the standard. We just mentioned one, and we did a webinar on this just, I believe, 2 months ago on impartiality. And of course, it's specified in 414 there. The laboratory shall identify risks to its own partiality on an ongoing basis. That example we gave here previously in regards to laboratories operating under various conditions, various environments. How ongoing does it need to be may vary amongst the environment in which a lab is operating in. 892, management reviews shall be recorded and include information related to the following. A new input for management review now is the results of risk identification. Those of you that was on the webinar last month, we talked about the decision rule, statements of compliance. When a statement of conformity to a specification or standard is provided, the laboratory shall document the decision rule employed, taking into the level of risk, such as false acceptance associated with the decision rule employed, and apply the decision rule. Those folks that missed that presentation, and if that's something that you feel that is going to affect you, and of course a decision rule, if you're making a statement of compliance on your report, there's new requirements concerning the decision rule. Webinar is available from last month on our website. The level of false acceptance, 95% confidence interval. Are you willing to accept that 5% possibility of a false acceptance? For all things that we discussed last month. Pops up in non-conforming work. Actions including the halting or repeating of work and withholding of reports as necessary are based upon the risk levels established by the laboratory. Corrective action. When a nonconformity exists, the laboratory shall, audit item E in the standard, update risk and opportunities determined during the planning if necessary. So a question may arise. What will an accrediting body be looking for in regards to compliance with Section 8.5? So currently you're if you're transitioning to 2017, just like all of our assessments, we look for objective evidence that these requirements are being met. For example, customer feedback. We're looking that you're actively seeking it, looking for objective evidence. Objective evidence that you're doing the internal audits. We're looking at your report, things like that. So we're going to be looking for objective evidence to show that the organization has adopted a risk-based approach. This may, and I want to emphasize may, include a specific document, procedure, or any other name where risk and opportunities are identified, as well as a plan to implement actions to minimize risk and maximize opportunities. Interview. I see assessing this more as maybe an interview process. For example, asking a question, what opportunities for improvement have been identified, implemented, or rejected, and what risk was identified? This would be in conjunction with Section 8.6, which is a section on improvement. And of course, we just discussed the management reviews. So the standard even forces the hand a little bit there with the management review. What was documented on the management review as far as inputs that was associated with the management review? So with this, even with the laboratory end, this is maybe if you're already say 9001 or versed in that standard, or perhaps you are 9001 certified, is something that you're already addressing. If you're new to this, and looking at it, and like I stated previously, is something that you're probably doing. I hope you're doing, but probably not really perhaps thought about how you're doing it. So, as an accrediting body, currently our assessors, we're assessing the 2017. And in reviewing assessment packages and those that are coming back, we're looking at objective evidence that the assessor looked at to make the decision as to whether or not the laboratory was or was not complying with this section. It's a challenge for labs, and it's going to be a challenge for the accrediting bodies. Hopefully, all the accrediting bodies will be doing this uniformly. And individual accrediting bodies are, of course, doing it uniformly within their AB, and then the ABs altogether are assessing this in a uniform manner. Okay, there's a lot of information there. Went over some examples. We went through the requirements. I know folks are going to be looking at, hey, what do we need to do? You have a lot of flexibility there. Just basically, according to the standard, this is not PJLA speaking or any of the other accrediting bodies. The standard is stating it's up to the lab to determine what risk and opportunities to pursue. And as far as how they're doing it, the flexibility is there. What is the requirement? Well, the lab is going to make that decision. There is no, you shall have a policy and procedure, and it has to, with a list of bulleting items that is often associated with the 2005 standard. So as always, I'm going to pause here for about 5 minutes. You have a space on your screen there to ask questions. Please keep your questions to the material that we've gone over today. The questions will be funneled to me. So I'm going to pause here, and I'll come back and see what sort of questions that come across, and I'll answer them as best of my ability. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I have a few questions here. So I hope if you had any questions going into this presentation and you didn't ask any at the closeout, it was hopefully because I answered them during the course of this webinar. I have a few questions here. Before I get to them, I just want to announce our next webinar. And one thing I want you to know here is a time change. We've usually been doing these at 1 o'clock Eastern time. We're in need of pushing it back an hour next month. So next month, our July webinar will start at 2 o'clock Eastern time. Still, looking at the 2017 standard, we're going to look at the requirements concerning document control and records. All right, I have a few questions here. One states, can we use one tool for strategic risk and opportunities and another tool like FEMA for the risk at the process level? And I would say absolutely. It's the laboratory's decision as to what tool they want to employ. As an assessment body, we'll be assessing and assuring that the requirements are being met, and if you have adopted a tool, that they're being utilized. So whatever you elect to use, just as I stated previously, create some sort of record that yes, it is being done. Or our competitors always a worst risk noting? So in identifying risk, you always have internal risks that are within your control and those external risks which are out of your control. So I would say what your competitors may be one of those risks that you would consider as external sources that may always quite often be a risk, I would say, worth noting. And basically, if they are a risk, identify what that risk would be. Whether they would always be a risk, I wouldn't just state a broad blanket statement stating that they would always propose a risk. It would just be dependent on what risk you are assessing and how you can coordinate your competitors as being a potential risk, particularly when you're pursuing an opportunity. So I would say that would be perhaps one of those external sources that could be identified as a risk, I would say quite often, but whether or not it would always be considered a risk, I would say not always, but it likely could be in most instances. Oh, lost my list here. And then finally, let's get to my correct screen. I'm not sure if I'm really understanding this. I'll read the question. In metrology expiration of calibration items, a risk and an opportunity. I'm reading this. This is live TV. A risk and an opportunity to challenge competitors on their certifications. Well, the only thing I'm going to address in regards to that question, if a metrology certification, if you're referring to calibration reports that are issued by your competitors, the requirement in 2005 and also in 2017, if there's any expiration or a due date or a recall date on the calibration report, needs to be specified by the customer, for one thing. An accredited calibration lab cannot dictate that to the customer. So we're getting a little bit off base here, but if a competitor is just blanketly requiring a specific recall date on a certificate, that's another issue altogether. Recall dates on certificates, yeah, that's a risk that needs to be looked at every time. Calibration intervals. We sort of touched on that on the presentation with intermediate checks. And one thing with calibration intervals, question also often comes up, well, how often should we need to establish as a calibration interval? There's always a risk involved in that. Example would be if you have a 5-year interval on, we went over that two types of instruments there. Let's say it was an electronic standard that was being used. You broadly put a 5-year interval. The risk of you having adverse effects because of that device going out of tolerance after 5 years would be much more greater than if you had a shorter interval. If you had a good system of intermediate checks, say between the calibration interval, that may lessen the risk in that you could pinpoint exactly when that instrument was drifting. So I hope I'm answering your question. If not, you can rephrase it and resubmit it at that address there. But you're asking if it's a risk if you challenge your competitors on that. Well, again, it's up to the lab to determine that. And that's stated in the standards. It's up to the lab to determine what is risk they need to pursue. But if you're asking if you go to your competitor directly and challenge any expiration date that they're blankly putting it on the certificate, and you identified a risk on doing that, then I would say that they may very well be a risk pursuing, because in this particular example, the risk on a calibration interval should be up to the customer and not the lab providing the service, and it should be discussed on the front end of any sort of review requests or tenders or contract review that took place as to what the customer is receiving. I know I went in several directions there. I hope I hit your I hope I hit the nail on the head as what you were asking. If I was if I didn't, please resubmit the question. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. I hope you found the information provided beneficial, especially for those of you that are transitioning into the 2017, or perhaps just involved in here and are establishing a 17025 compliant quality management system for the first time. And like I said, I didn't get a whole lot of questions, so I hope if you had any going in that hopefully some of them were answered during the course of the presentation. So with that being said, enjoy the rest of your day, and look forward to having you all log back in and looking at the requirements on document control and records 2 o'clock. Remember the time change on Thursday, July 26th.